Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow.
So, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas threatens this week that, ready for this quote, millions of fighters would swarm Jerusalem and topple the Jewish state capital, warning that, quote, this is, again, a quote from him, no matter how many houses and how many settlements they declare that they will plan to build here and there, is what he says, they shall all be destroyed. This is what Abbas said. So this is the partner for peace, Mahmoud Abbas. Let me say it again. Millions of fighters would swarm Jerusalem and topple the Jewish state's capital city, warning that no matter how many houses and how many settlements they declare that they plan to build, they shall all be destroyed. He also said in Arabic at a refugee camp near Ramallah that was heavy with threats of destruction, doubled down on the Palestinian government's policy of using public money to pay convicted terrorists and their families, telling his audience, we will not accept their designation of our martyrs as terrorists. Our martyrs are the martyrs of the homeland. These martyrs, as they call them, which are really terrorists, actually kill Israeli civilians. In fact, they've killed American civilian students who have been over in Israel. One I remember most recently from Vanderbilt University.
Yeah,
so which
created a U.S. law, Taylor Force Act, which has been adopted by Congress. This is the follow-up to that quote, continues by Mahmoud Abbas. We will not allow them to deduct a single penny from their money. All the money will go back to them because the martyrs, the wounded, and the prisoners are the most sacred things we have. Remember, we call this pay to slay program. And these terrorists, whether they are 18-year-old girls like we talked about, that the group that was sponsoring Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib's trip to Israel, that got canceled, that group was praising as a part of the resistance. Whether it's an 18-year-old girl, a 40-year-old father, the money, they tell these families, hey, you'll get $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 if you carry out these attacks on civilians.
Now, by the way, when we talk about this pay to slay issue, it's this idea that they pay money to the terrorist families after they've committed an atrocity against innocent civilians. They then, and let's say they're killed in the action because the Israeli Defense Forces take them out. What happens then, and this is important to understand, is the Palestinian Authority pays those families it's usually about $20,000 a year. Yeah. Now, let me tell you what's interesting about that. Where's that money coming from? Ask yourself that. It's coming from outside governmental money. It could be coming from U.S. dollars for all we know. I mean, this is, obviously not authorized, but that's what they do. So you've got this culture that they have there. And meanwhile, the pressure is, can we get a peace plan? Are you going to get a peace plan with a group that's trying to tell you that they're going to basically destroy Jerusalem? Or is it time for there to be a change in the leadership within the Palestinian Authority? And I think that is what the Palestinian people are coming to recognize, as a poll recently showed that the president's peace plan is getting good support in the Palestinian Authority. Why? Because they know that their existing leadership continues to put on a ruinous path. We've got a lot more to discuss on the issue of Israel. It's a front and center issue for us. We have that office in Jerusalem. We're going to come back from the break. We're going to take calls. We're going to take comments. We're going to get into an analysis of what it means when the Palestinian Authority leadership starts talking about taking over Jerusalem. Does not sound like peace talk. There is a petition of support for the AClj for our work in Jerusalem. You could do that by going to AClj.org. That's AClj.org. Back with more in a moment.
Israel is under constant deadly terrorist knife and rocket attacks. Jewish students, professors, and Christians who support Israel face vicious discrimination at U.S. universities, all in an attempt to delegitimize the state of Israel. Israel is our ally. The Jewish people are friends. It's our duty to defend them. That's why the AClj is launching a massive new multinational legal campaign in defense of Israel, in the U.S., at the UN, and with world leaders. But we need these global leaders to hear from you now. Add your name to our new petition. petition to defend Israel from anti-Israel attacks across the globe. Call now, 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255. Or you can add your name online, AClj.org.
I want to play for you in Arabic what Mahmoud Abbas is saying. I'll tell you what it means, and you'll hear him say something. Then you're going to also hear a chant. Take a listen.
القدس مهما قالوا موحدة تنقض السفارة نعمل كذا القدس لنا رغم أنفهم.
So here's what that says. Whatever they call it, then talking about the United States, they moved their embassy, but Jerusalem is ours whether they like it or not. And then the chant is, to Jerusalem we march, martyrs by the millions. And they keep repeating that over and over again, which is an Arabic utilization of language, of motivating their, you remember this during some of you old enough to remember, the Iranian hostage regime, when the Iranians took the Americans during the Iranian Revolution. The Revolutionary Guard just came back in power. The Ayatollah came back in, and they took the American hostages at the embassy. They did the same thing. They would say, listen and repeat. And that's how they did it. You know, we hate America, or America's the great state, and that's what they would say. And they would say, listen and repeat, and you would pick this up in the translations of it. So this is part of the rhetoric. This is the ground rhetoric. This is what's taking place on the ground in the Palestinian Authority. Now, I think that here's the dilemma that Mahmoud Abbas has. The president is rolling out and has rolled out portions of the peace plan that pumps a lot of money into that economy. And the people are saying, you know, that money means food and medicine and schooling, but you got in those schools, you're not going to be teaching the destruction of the state of Israel. So there's going to be strings attached to that money, but these are appropriate. So you've got to understand that what's going on the ground there. Now, at the American Center for Law and Justice, also understand this, we have an office in Jerusalem, fully staffed, government affairs, lawyers as well. So it's full staff. We also have, and this is important to understand, a team going to the United Nations this week. They're going to be dealing with issues involving Israel. They'll be dealing with issues involving Christian persecution in other countries where we've got these reports that we've issued. In fact, this is a copy. I'm holding this for our TV audience. This is a copy of what's going to the UN. This is it's from our European Center for Law and Justice, Advocating for Human Rights. It's the 2018-29 report to the United States General Assembly. Jordan has executed a letter that goes with this. It talks about the AClj, and then in it highlights various countries that we are not just talking about these issues, we're actually engaged in these issues. So that's what's going on right now on the ground. But understand the rhetoric. Millions descending on Jerusalem. This is all to try to maintain power. That's what this really is.
Absolutely right. And this idea, again, I think that the Palestinian Authority realized that they are being pushed by their own people, that things are not moving in the direction they wanted, that this administration is that much tougher on them, is not really going to bend it all to their will. They had that chance, the Obama administration, they still couldn't figure anything out. They had 8 years of Barack Hussein Obama as president, a guy who was no real big fan of Israel, let's be honest. And still, the Palestinians were too off-putting for him to deal with. That's the truth. They were too corrupt, too dangerous, and too violent for even Barack Obama's White House and teams and negotiators to come up with a deal. What do you think President Trump's team is going to be able to do? Well, they're going to take the hardline, tough approach. And so if Mahmoud Abbas's initial response to that is going to be death to all Israelis, you know what will end up to Mahmoud Abbas ultimately? It will not be a nice ending. You know, it will not be a nice ending for him because ultimately they're the people they want to eat. They want to have decent services. And when you go and say, our martyrs are our martyrs, we're going to continue to pay for slay, and the prisoners, and we're going to keep the money going to them. Do you know what that means? You're going to keep paying terrorists and not funding schools. You're going to keep paying radical jihadist terrorists to attack Israeli civilians, but you're not going to pay for basic services for your people. So the money's either going into the pockets of Mahmoud Abbas and his henchmen or the pockets of terrorist families.
Let me read a couple questions that come in by Facebook. By the way, we'll take your calls on the phone as well at 800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. Tony on Facebook said, what is the tipping point with the dangerous rhetoric? Well, I think they're at it right now. I think what Jordan just said is absolutely correct. I think they're at that tipping point right now, actually. They're trying to start another intifada because they know this peace plan is going to be very attractive to the population. So the Palestinian people are going to like this idea of economic improvement, political. There's political aspects to it. We call it, the first part that came out was the economic phase of this. There'll be a political phase of this. So Mahmoud Abbas is trying to stir up this rhetoric. Why? To keep power. We also have Carl on Facebook said, I'd love to hear Representatives Omar and Tlaib try to justify this rhetoric. We're not hearing a lot out of them right now after they were going to go to visit Israel, or as they called it, Palestine. And there is no Palestine, the state of Palestine. They were going to go over, try to get a Palestine visa. I mean, think about that for a minute, or a passport. So here's what you have. They were connecting with a group that has known ties to terrorists. And this is the problem. So Mahmoud Abbas then says this. Now, think about this if you're the neighbor, if you're Israel. We shall enter Jerusalem, millions of fighters, he says. We shall enter it all of us, the entire Palestinian people, the Arab nation, the Islamic nation, and the Christian nation. They shall all enter Jerusalem. First of all, ask Christians in the West Bank and Gaza whether they'd rather be under Israeli government protection or under Hamas. And they'll tell you, if they're telling you the truth, and we represent a lot of Palestinian Christians. Well, in fact, we've represented Palestinian Christian families that have had their husbands killed because they operated a Bible society, a Bible bookstore in Gaza. So when people say to me, you don't understand the plight of the Palestinian people, my response to that is always the same. Really? We represented them. We have an office in Jerusalem. We got a family out of Gaza whose husband, Rami Ayad, was stabbed 37 or 38 times. Why? Because he operated a Christian bookstore in Gaza. So Mahmoud Abbas doesn't need to be telling us about the Christians in the Holy Land, coming in to take over Jerusalem. That's just not the reality of what's on the ground. Lee on Facebook said, do you believe the president's peace plan could force the Palestinian Authority to rethink their approach to Israel?
I think that, honestly, there's always a rethinking option, and they could change their rhetoric very quickly. I think what we've seen coming out of the Palestinian Authority right now is this doubling down of extreme rhetoric. And like you said, Dad, I think it is an attempt to thwart that because the public certainly does want a peace plan. I think that they want a peace plan. The average public is not sending their sons and daughters to die as what he calls martyrs or terrorists. It's not worth it even for the money for them. So what does he need to do? He has to stir up the populace and whip them up into such a frenzy that it does become a mass wave of violence. And if you have a mass wave of violence, an Intifada Part 3 uprising, then it won't matter what their peace plan is. It won't really ever have be considered. If you aren't able to do that, so this will be a key time for the Palestinian populace, because if you're not able to do that, it will actually it'll be forced to get real consideration. And I think that's going to be key. Will Palestinians actually have the time? Will there be a period of relative calmness to actually consider this peace plan, or is he going to basically try, which he's definitely trying, we don't have to question this if he's trying, is he going to be successful? Because these are corrupt, crony leaders who line their pockets with billions of dollars, and their families who are living all over Europe, not in the Palestinian territories, they see that would be the end of their power.
Let me say this also, and I say this to show you to give an understanding of what we're dealing with. This is, again, Mahmoud Abbas's own words. We shall remain here, talking about Israel, and nobody can remove us from our homeland. If they want, they themselves can leave. So there's your two-state solution answer. Those who are far into this land have no right to it. That's talking about the Israelis. So we say to them, every stone that you have to build our land and every house you have built on our land is bound to be destroyed, Allah willing. So this is your partner for peace. But you know what? Moderates. The Palestinian people do not want this. By the way, this isn't Hamas. This is the Palestinian Authority's leadership, which is the old Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was terrorist too. But then they kind of morphed into a more moderate political party, so-called. This is the moderate political party. And then they say, Hamas homes and cities built by Jews and other ethnic groups living in Israel will all go to the garbage bin of history. This is from the guy you're trying to cut a peace deal with. So the people in the Palestinian territory need to understand what they've got, and I think they know it. These are smart people. They know it has not worked. They know it continues to not work. These refugee camps have been around for 70 years. When we come back from the break, we're going to be joined by our two senior military analysts and senior counsel, Skip Ash, and who's a retired colonel, United States Army, and then Colonel Wes Smith as well, senior military analyst, to talk about the legal implications of this. And Mike Pompeo said Sunday Israel's right to defend itself from threats by the Iranians. Israel and the U.S. will back it. As I mentioned at the American Center for Law and Justice, we have a full functioning office in Jerusalem. Your support of the AClj makes a big difference to that office. Take a look.
In the last 7 years, the Middle East went through an earthquake.
Today, the group Hamas declared a day of rage, urging attacks on Israelis.
If you step back and look at the picture, you can see the circle enclosing around Israel.
This conflict has never been about establishing a Palestinian state. It's always been about the existence of a Jewish state.
Jewish wedding in Israel interrupted by air raid sirens.
BDS is a new form of anti-Semitism. The call to boycott the State of Israel, to divest investment from the State of Israel.
Graphic new video of violent protests and terror attacks coming out of Israel.
The entire conception of this is to destroy Israel by turning Israel into an oppressor.
When they say that Israel should be wiped out, that they mean it?
I don't have the luxury not to believe it.
We appreciate your support of the American Center for Law and Justice. A great way to do that is just go to AClj.org. You can support the work of the AClj easily that way with an online contribution. Also, sign that petition, Standing with Israel. Hundreds of thousands of you have. It makes a big difference as we go to the UN, as we talked about on this broadcast this week. We're at the United Nations defending Israel, in court defending Israel as well. AClj.org.
Israel is under constant deadly terrorist knife and rocket attacks. Jewish students, professors, and Christians who support Israel face vicious discrimination at U.S. universities, all in an attempt to delegitimize the state of Israel. Israel is our ally. The Jewish people are friends. It's our duty to defend them. That's why the AClj is launching a massive new multinational legal campaign in defense of Israel, in the U.S., at the UN, and with world leaders. But we need these global leaders to hear from you now. Add your name to our new petition, a petition to defend Israel from anti-Israel attacks across the globe. Call now, 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255. Or you can add your name online, aclj.org.
Skip Ash has joined us, as has Wes Smith. Wes has got a piece up, what you need to know about efforts to delegitimize Israel. But I want to focus, and that's at aclj.org. I want to focus right now, though, on what we see happening, Skip, on the ground. I mean, you got the rhetoric coming from Mahmoud Abbas. You and I have been there many, many times. I've been over into the refugee camps. I've been over into the Palestinian Authority-controlled areas. We know what this is. I mean, this is politics.
It absolutely is, but it's also a sign of weakness. Right now, even the Sunni world is turning on the Palestinians because they have cried wolf so many times. They've been given opportunities to have a state. Israel has given almost everything they've asked for, and they've turned it down multiple times. So they've cried wolf once too many times, and now that we have a president here who's acting on behalf of Israel and not taking no for an answer. And if the Palestinians balk, he goes the next step anyway. What's happening is they don't know how to react. So now they're trying to stir up an outward enemy, trying to get the Palestinian people focused on an outward enemy. I'm not sure it's going to work this time because our president communicates directly with people, and he is talking about what he wants to do for them and improve their lives. And I think that's resonating with many of the Palestinians who have seen too many dead ends.
You know, Wes, you've got a piece up at AClj.org said what you need to know about efforts to delegitimize Israel. But what's fascinating to me is you've got all this rhetoric coming out of Mahmoud Abbas this past weekend, and you cannot even find this on the mainstream media.
No, there is selective indignation when it comes to Israel and the Palestinians. You know, and people think of Abbas as being a moderate guy. He is not. He was Yasser Arafat's number 2 man and inherited that mantle. Who was Yasser Arafat? He founded Fatah, which was responsible for multiple bombings, hijackings of airplanes, assassinations. This is his number 2 guy. So he puts a nice suit on and tries to present well, but he is not a moderate person. And he's really crossed a line, I think, in calling for Jerusalem to be invaded by millions of Palestinian fighters.
Yep.
And meanwhile, okay, as you alluded to, the Palestinian people suffer because the Palestinian Authority and their other organizations are corrupt. The leadership have fat bankrolls. They live extremely well while the Palestinian people suffer.
So what we've got going on is our office in Jerusalem fully engaged on this. Now, our office in France, in Strasbourg, where we have our European Center for Law and Justice, has filed a report with the United Nations General Assembly, and we've got a team of 5, both lawyers and government affairs officials, going up to the UN's meeting this week to meet with various embassies on a whole host of these issues. So, again, it's just important for you to understand at the AClj, we don't just talk about these issues. We're engaged in it. These are legal documents that are being filed. We've got meetings where we're advocating various positions. That's what we do. All right, we're going to take some phone calls. I said we would.
Let's go to Chris in Nevada on line 1. Chris, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Hi, Chris.
Hi. To what extent do Congresswomen Tlaib and Omar get intel between Israel and the United States?
Well, Omar, I'd say she would get the most, and that's because she's on the Foreign Affairs Committee. So she's not part of the Gang of 8 that gets the most confidential classified information. Those are the leaders of Congress. But by being on the Foreign Affairs Committee, she certainly gets classified information. So that would include on all foreign policy, and that would include, of course, the state of Israel. So she would be one of a select group of probably about 60, 70 members of Congress that gets the most out of 435. I'd say it was less than that. It's probably 50 members of Congress that gets the most information on the state of Israel. And that is because Nancy Pelosi decided to put her with all the rhetoric, with all the questions about who she even is, who she's even been married to in the past, who her family is, the multiple tax documents, the multiple people, and her statements, of course, on foreign policy. Remember, it is the leader, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, the top Democrat elected in the United States, who chose Ilhan Omar to get top secret information about the state of Israel.
So let me tell you what the Prime Minister of Israel has tweeted out, Skip, and get your comments on this. He says, in a major operational effort, we've thwarted an attack against Israel by the Iranian Quds forces and Shiite militias. I reiterate, he says, Iran has no immunity anywhere. Our forces operate in every sector against the Iranian aggression. And then he says, if someone rises up to kill you, kill him first, which is a motto, if you will, of some of the Israeli Secret Service kind of forces.
Well, right. Every nation has a right to national self-defense. And remember what Iran's goal is. They want to create this arc of nations from Iran through Iraq, Syria, Lebanon to encounter Israel on its own borders. And they're willing to do whatever they have to do to try to bring the war to Israel. We no longer are dealing with the Jewish people that are going to quietly march into ovens. These are people who are going to stand up. They're going to defend themselves. They are proud. They are capable. And they will do what's necessary to defend Israel and the Israeli people. And they deserve our support and our prayers and our attention. And they're getting it from this president. And I'm very proud of our president for standing up for them.
You know, what Skip alluded to was in the Nazi era, there was a sense that the Jews voluntarily, which by the way wasn't voluntarily, but they were just outnumbered, outcontrolled, and you had the horror of the Holocaust. And the idea in a post-Holocaust environment is that the Jewish state is tough. There will always be a refuge for the Jewish people in the state of Israel, Jewish people from the diaspora around the globe, and that's important. And when you go there, you learn it and you understand why Israel is so protective of its internal rights to exist and also its national security. It's not something that can be taken for granted. I want to take Phyllis's comment here because I think her phone call is really important.
Yeah, Phyllis in New York, online 3. Phyllis, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hey, Phyllis.
Hi. Anyone just looking at their own self-interest should be supporting the state of Israel. God says in his word, those who bless them I will bless, and those who curse them I will curse. This is in more than one place in the Bible, and it isn't just related to one incident. And history has proven it too.
You're 100% correct. And again, I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for the Palestinian people, the people in the Palestinian territory. I have zero empathy for their government, which is completely corrupt, which is dangerous to the Palestinian people and has kept them impoverished. And we're going to be offering, the United States is going to be offering a peace plan. It's going to be a deal that I don't think you're going to be able to turn down. And the fact of the matter is, if the Palestinian Authority, because they know that's why they're trying to incite right now, Wes. That's why they're trying to incite, because they know what's coming is going to be very hard for the Palestinian people, the people living in the Palestinian territories, to turn down.
Oh, yeah. They are disenchanted with their leadership. They understand, I think, at some level why they're suffering and why the needs are so great there. The events of the last few days, though, Jay, are very significant. This is the first time that Israel has accused Iran of a major impending attack on the state of Israel. This was not an isolated 1 or 2 drones coming across the border. This was a major operation that Israeli intelligence had been monitoring for months, and they did a preemptive strike to stop what would have been a major drone attack against Israel, against innocent civilians.
That's going to do it for the broadcast this week. Let me encourage you to sign on to that petition in support of Israel. And talking about support the work of the AClj. You could do that at AClj.org. Sign up for our Facebook feeds, Twitter, Periscope, very, very important. AClj.org, that's AClj.org.
Israel is under constant deadly terrorist knife and rocket attacks. Jewish students, professors, and Christians who support Israel face vicious discrimination at U.S. universities, all in an attempt to delegitimize the state of Israel. Israel is our ally. The Jewish people are friends. It's our duty to defend them. That's why the AClj is launching a massive new multinational legal campaign in defense of Israel, in the U.S., at the UN, and with world leaders. But we need these global leaders to hear from you now. Add your name to our new petition, a petition to defend Israel from anti-Israel attacks across the globe. Call now, 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255. Or you can add your name online, aclj.org.